Then. Hello, December 2021, Prometheus Dev Summit. Code of conduct applies as per usual. No new faces. Let's get started. Last time we said we would try and continue the discussion where we left off course of time issues. So let's. Yeah, we talked about how and if we want to allow working with label values and query results within PromQL or as something as post-processing, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know where we left off the discussion. Ben made an example and then... Do you still remember your example with value extract within? Okay. Should we restart mentally?
Give me 1 second for my brain to catch up. It's not been a coffee day. Oh yeah. I don't remember. There is also somebody who wanted timestamp parsing. There was a discussion on the list, and I forget where that. Or there was a discussion on an issue, and I think Julian commented, Julian and or somebody else commented, let's not do this.
So you are referring to the semantic versioning thing, which is different from this one.
Yeah.
This one is extracting, for example, like the value of a bucket inside an actual value of a metric output, so that you could extract some data from the labels and put that into the result of your query. And then another use case is when you have metrics like timestamp, like when the process started, that you could in PromQL directly put that in a human readable format in a PromQL in a label. So it is easier to debug when you only have access to the Prometheus UI. So that's the two use cases that we were discussing last time.
I don't remember why I thought it was a good idea.
I mean, in part, probably because it allows you to, like, for example, do math on bucket boundaries and such, which becomes less of an issue with new histograms. For others, at least for numeric values, it's probably a case of people doing stuff wrong and they should have put stuff into the actual value or into a new metric as opposed to in a label, like, I don't know, thresholds for temperature warning or what have you. Counter argument or devil's advocate, if someone has data which is formatted incorrectly, it's not really helping them a lot that in theory someone should have done it differently. They're stuck with data which they cannot properly process. On the other hand, by not forcing this, we invite more creative solutions which are less than ideal.
So there is one case where Prometheus itself will put a number in the label. It is with the count value function. And if you want to get back the most used value in a PromQL query, well, usually you can do that with maybe quantiles or something like that. I don't know. There are probably other ways to do that, but this would be an easier way to do that.
I mean, personally, I'm not actively against it. The question is only, would we even find someone who is interested in doing the work? That's a resounding yes.
Is there like
Well,
a proposed syntax for this?
the syntax is in the document. It's
Okay.
Or we steal the syntax from Grafana, which also has functions outside of PromQL to basically extract values. Or if we as Prometheus decide to have certain functions, I would argue strongly that Grafana should update its side and deprecate the, like, still support them, but migrate to the new versions to have parity between the two, if we do something like this.
I mean, I think it's also a result for now features essentially say we are willing to have this behind feature flag, experimental, blah, 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 because that I think is very different from past attitudes where there was a lot of like fix your data instead of asking for new functions in PromQL. And then if nobody really wants it, or if we have an implementation and we realize this is a horrible idea or nobody really needs it, then we can still say, okay, we'll remove it again. It was just behind the feature flag anyway. Yeah, so just like this is substantially different from thinking if you should do this at all and if users should better fix the data or use external tools for things like that.
Just to play with the thought a little bit, what does it take, or like how could we make it easier to fix the data? Like assuming you can't control the original source of the metrics. With relabeling, as far as I can see, you can't do this, right? You can't take a label value and stuff it into the value of some other of a metric. But like, could you? And would that solve the problem? So basically, instead of saying we extend PromQL to make it better to deal with bad data, we would say, okay, no, like one step before that, we make it possible to transform the bad data into good data. But it would not help with the label, like with the count values.
Yeah, we have a regex extract in like SNMP exporter to handle this. Could do it in metric relabel configs. That makes the syntax for metric relabel configs different from normal relabel configs. Target relabel configs.
I think it will be confusing for users to have that in metric relabel configs to change the value of metrics, and it will also be quite a big change in the code as well. I don't know if we actually need that. If we can do that in PromQL.
I don't think anybody would be confused by it. It would be a departure from our previous stance on the matter.
I mean, both would be, right? I'm more curious, like what the feel is, which one is the more appealing one. But if you think the PromQL extension is more useful and more appealing, then cool.
I think doing it at ingestion would be better if it were actually not terrible code-wise.
The problem with doing it at ingestion time is that you're leaving the user who has a problem a little bit in the rain.
I don't understand what you mean by that.
If you have existing data, you cannot get stuff out of that data if you can only do those functions at ingestion time. It's too late by the time I'm querying.
Yeah, I mean, okay, but what I'm hearing is neither would be terrible, but doing it in PromQL solves more problems and is less invasive for us in a way.
I mean, arguably, doing it in PromQL is the larger movement away from past convictions. Because it shifts Prometheus from your data must be near perfect, and then you get everything, towards basically ingesting non-perfect data and carrying the cost of improving that data at runtime, and not only once at ingestion time. Question is, it's probably worth it.
I guess that's also similar to this whole eternal debate about uppercasing and lowercasing label replace, which I never felt strongly about either way, but yeah, I guess we should have.
I think fundamentally we should support working with less than optimal data. And if the most flexible or the best way to do that is as like adding another function, I think that's totally the right thing to do.
I mean, in particular, because we now have this escape edge, we can add it behind the feature flag. So it's not, what was this seasonal thing we introduced and then we realized it's
Alt winters.
Yeah, so like the whole winters thing that we now support forever. It's not even the whole winters that everyone wants. It's just one whole winters, and it's very confusing. And if that had been behind the feature flag for just the 3 months, we would have learned so much and could have done it better. So from that perspective, I'm super easy on, let's introduce it behind the feature flag, and then we will learn if it was a horrible idea to support it, or if it was actually a super good idea. Or something in between, then we can still keep discussing, but we have nothing lost. And if nobody implements it after we have told everyone you're happy to contribute, it will be behind the feature flag, then it's also an insight, right? Then apparently it wasn't that desperately needed after all. But we are not in that situation where we just say no all the time.
Meta question on feature flags. Do we actually know like how many people activated a given feature flag, or whether it's been
home about feature flags?
How would we?
I mean, that's I'm just asking the question, right? No, we don't. So yeah, that's I'm a little bit concerned about. We will know if we like it will be put through its paces, but I also don't have like a good solution. I'm wondering if it would be like one thing I'm kicking around in my head is a low effort, like activate all features, and then a bunch of us could YOLO it everything onto our Prometheus servers. I don't know if that would be enough.
Slightly diverging for a second, we could consider if Prometheus emits data about what feature flags are enabled, if Grafana could collect this, and maybe we get some stats out of this for use of the Prometheus project.
There is a feature request opened 3 days ago by Grafana Labs on the Prometheus repository to have a new API endpoint, and I have tagged that as P3. So yeah, this is something that can happen, and Grafana is interesting to have that because they don't know if they need to use the @ modifier, that kind of thing. So that's why we have that proposal from Brian Boham, and I think it will get implemented. Yes.
Couldn't they use the flags API endpoint at the moment, theoretically?
Yes, they could. But well, it's not really
It's not
optimal.
beautiful. Yeah. But you could get the info. It's not nice. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you link that issue?
Yes, and also Julius, you can have the feature flag and not the feature enabled if you don't use the correct version of Prometheus.
So it doesn't error out if you provide an illegal feature
No,
flag?
so you can roll back and upgrade
right.
without
Compatibility.
because it's super experimental.
But we want to have metrics about that, right? And was it metrics?
Yes, we also want a metric about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that you have a list of unknown feature flags that are no ops, and like you get an idea what your feature flag's actually doing.
Yeah, just like one time series per feature flag that's enabled would be a good thing, or just like per possible feature flag with 0 or 1. and the feature name in a label value.
Yeah, something like that. That needs a bit of thought, but that was the idea, to do feature flag hygiene, essentially. So we should report better what
With
they're doing.
PromQL feature flags, I always run into it with my trainings now that, I don't know, I'm always worried about confusing people even more. Like, hey, all timestamps in PromQL are always relative. Well, except for this one feature that is not official yet, the add modifier, but it's not really part of PromQL yet, and so on. So, yeah, I'm always a bit worried about putting too many PromQL features into feature flags, and then it's very unclear to people like what is actually PromQL nowadays.
But I think that the endpoint would also support more than just the feature flag, but the features in general. Like when we move something out of a feature flag, it does not mean that it is always enabled. Like the wall compression was something that we could have exposed, that kind of things. And there is still a flag. You can still disable it. So
But part of the feature flag hygiene is also to, whenever you release a new minor release, to think about graduating things that have been behind the feature flag for a while, or they were just declared experimental, but they have not been behind the feature flag. We also have that, right? You don't want to accumulate more and more stuff that is secretly experimental, but nobody is actually aware of that because it has been around forever. Remote write, cuff, whatever. So, I mean, I think it's always the same thing, and the yeah, I mean, the extreme cases would be to just not have new features, so nobody's confused, or to have new features far too lightheartedly, and then we get cold winters all over the place. So we want this is the whole idea, right? We want something in between where we can still have new features without ruining everything.
Yeah, so that's, I did not want to block this particular feature on general discussions about feature flags and how we handle them. I was just curious, basically, how could we, in 3 months or like 2 releases later, say, oh, this has soaked enough.
So one point, I need to talk to Brian why he needs this, because I wasn't aware that he was even thinking about this, much less that he asked about it. But I think this is probably something which can also, like, if we can feed this back from Grafana to Prometheus, maybe then we can also make more informed decisions about what we can already graduate. Like, for example, the add modifier. I would expect that quite a few people, power users, are running with the add modifier because it's just super nice to have. But if we have hard data that we can say X amount of users or X percent of users are using this and that thing, that also informs us if we can just declare something as non-experimental and make it part of mainline.
So actually, like the reason why Brian wants that, it is not even for the experimental feature flags. It is for an API endpoint that we have added to get the values of certain labels, where Grafana now is doing a query for series, and in the future they could use that, but they need to know if the Prometheus server supports that new feature. So it's not even talking about feature flag, it's just about features that we enable in Prometheus that can be used by Grafana to optimize their workflow.
Kind of like the CPU flags tell you what features your CPU has potentially enabled for you right at this point. Right?
Yes.
Actually, Bartek makes a good point. We also don't know like which Prometheus versions are in use. So just to put the idea out there, some projects do collect telemetry, either opt-in or opt-out from when you run them. I think I would prefer it not to be, like, I would prefer it to be off by default, but this could give us interesting information.
So it cannot be opt-in because it is a CNCF policy.
Okay.
So there are some rules at CNCF, and if we actually want telemetry, we need to be very careful and to at least document ourselves on what are the CNCF rules on that, because we are not free to do whatever we want there.
Probably a good idea.
Richie, your mic is off.
Sorry, I was muted. Circling back to the initial question, I think my gut is we have a consensus towards allowing someone to do the work if they make a feature design document and then do it behind the feature flag. So let's try for consensus. Feature flag. Consensus. We are happy for the community to create a proposal for extending PromQL and will work with them on a design document and implementation behind a feature flag. At this time, no one in Prometheus team is interested in doing the work themselves. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Very good. So, reminder for people on team, we need more votes because we are on the super long tail of our backlog, which is also nice. Of the backlogged stuff, which we have the right people. Okay, let's do the default port allocation page. Julian, over to you.
Yes, so we have a wiki page that you probably all know of that contains the default port allocation for all the exporters. And while it's a nice page, it has shown some issues in the past, like people actually removing half of the list or multiple exporters on the same port. And I think given the scale of Prometheus, that does not really scale anymore, and that cannot really serve as a solution for the future, because like we have more and more exporter, and I think maintaining a list of ports does not really make a lot of sense. And I would like to discuss what we can do about it. What could be the alternative?
I mean, we could just delete it. Like, what would be the problem if we were to delete this page without a replacement?
Yeah, that was also my thinking. It might not scale, but I cannot think of something better.
No, I mean, my question is more, what is it worth the problem that it solves?
In theory, yes, because we cannot guarantee non-overlapping exporter usage within our user base. And if we don't give some way of them preventing overlap in port allocations, collisions will happen at some point, and it'll be just a worse experience for the end users.
I guess the question is nowadays, how important are port allocations?
I mean, unless we hit 65,000 ports, is there any actual tangible cost in just continuing to offer this?
If we talk cloud native, people run their exporter in a pod and run it on port 80 anyway, right? I mean, this is different from the olden days where you had like a million things on your box and everyone needed their own port because They were all sharing the same network in the same box.
And I also think that the cost of a collision isn't that high. If you're combining random things from the internet on your box, and one of them says, "Oh, port is already in use," okay, I need to change the port for one of those. We shouldn't have collisions within the core Prometheus things. I agree with that. I don't think we need to try to maintain this for everything that does anything with Kubernetes, with Prometheus.
So I also think like kind of the same. I think that we should maybe not delete the page, but like freeze it and add a word at the beginning, like we recommend all the exporter routers to allow the user to easily change the port the exporter is listening to.
But I'm not aware of a single exporter which makes it unnecessarily hard to change port configuration. Like, I don't know all of them. There's way too many, but I don't know of any which make it deliberately hard. Just coming from the devil's advocate stance, there's more non-cloud native users than cloud native users of Prometheus, in my strong conviction, because there is just not so many people who are truly fully cloud native. In particular, large enterprises will, for the foreseeable future, carry significant amounts of infrastructure. And even within just a large corporation, take any Fortune 50, it will be super confusing if one team has stuff on this port and another team has stuff on that port. And that's before you go into things like, I need to create ACLs or default firewalling rules or what have you. Like some sort of mechanism to enable decentralized synchronization, if people want to have decentralized synchronization, seems prudent. We don't really have maintenance burden. Of course, it's a wiki. Everyone can just do whatever.
But that's what Julian just said, right? We have a maintenance burden because some random user comes along, deletes the whole page, probably accidentally, maybe maliciously. So someone needs to go back, restore the old version, and then 5 other entries have been added in the meantime. So there are people maintaining that page and feeling it's not really scaling. But I mean, I think, Richard, all what you say is true, right? If we really started from a clean slate and then the node exporter would use usually the same port as the whatever, as an MP exporter, that would be bad. But I guess nowadays, if an exporter is added, it's usually a pretty niche thing. Like it's unlikely that a new exporter is added in the next years that will be super popular, and then another exporter is added that is also super popular, and both are sharing the same port, right? I mean, for a non-cloud native user to practically run into port collision, if he froze the page now, it's probably fairly unlikely from a pragmatic perspective.
And also on the maintenance burden, if nobody actually checks that what's on the page is up to date and actually still a project, that everything that needs to be on that page is on that page, or that even the numbers that are on the page are correct, at some point I can't trust the page anymore, and then it brings no value even.
So maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but for me, the value is not I am a user and I want to look up what port a thing is. For me, the value is I create a new exporter and I don't want to collide with any other exporters, so I just choose a number. So I'm non-collisioning with everyone else who chose to take that step on the assumption that the people who have more due diligence in creating their exporters are checking this page. You basically allow the people who are doing due diligence when creating their stuff to just make it a little bit nicer for everyone else. That's where I'm coming from.
The page has also another usage. It's not only about discovering the ports, but I have also used that to discover just exporters, because this is the most complete list of exporters on the internet, which is another use case for that page. Obviously, what you get behind that, sometimes it's a project without a README and without any code. So sometimes it's an empty Git repository, sometimes But you still have a quite good list of exporters, and then you obviously need to assess the quality. But this is also a discoverability tool to me. And you actually used it, for example, when CNCF asked us, oh, how many exporters does exist for Prometheus so we can update the sponsorship prospectus? This is the most complete we have, so that's the number we give.
To be fair, it's also what we use for open metrics as the initial basis for exploration, how many things we had.
It should be revamped to that use case then, to not be specifically about port allocations and non-colliding ports and all of that.
But
So just like a list of exporters.
But have a list, if you just want to have that, it's just not ordered alphabetically. It's basically ordered temporarily, but it's ordered and it is a list. Like if you take away the Eindeutigkeit, I like the English term. I'm not, both ways unique. The unique one-to-one linkage. If you take away this property, you lose something. You don't gain anything by making it not a port list. And as to Björn's point, yes, many of us will be automatically putting stuff onto other ports, either through configuration or just through the network boundary, as it were. But that's not an argument in favor of not having somewhat unique port numbers, because there is not much extra cost in simply changing that if you so choose. I think we should potentially consider recommending a substring, like we have it also in open metrics, where if you want to serve two different metrics from two different things, that you have /SNMP exporter /metrics and /blackbox exporter /metrics. So you can actually put more things behind one port if you so choose, but that's distinct from this being a useful resource, in my opinion.
Okay, I mean, the one alternative suggested was freeze the page, be done with it, and whatever, except the fallout. If we do something else, then we need a plan how to maintain it. Because if you just keep the status quo, then someone has to do the work, and apparently this work triggered this whole discussion. So apparently it's not okay to let someone do the work.
Well, I mean, we can have someone who cares about this page do the work.
Yeah, sure. Then we needed someone who says, okay, I'll think the page works as is, and I'll feel responsible keeping it in shape. Which is, it doesn't have to be like what MR said. I think we don't need this requirement that this is like super trusted information. But when someone accidentally or maliciously deletes the whole content, then there must be someone responsible restoring it. Or if it's like, yeah, inappropriate content is added to the page and all those things.
I can try and see if I can subscribe to this page somehow and get all the updates. I don't work with GitHub wikis a lot, to be honest. I would like if I was not the only person, but I can try and see how I can get updates on this.
I mean, we could just leave it there. Richie is the main responsible person for that. Whoever wants to help is, of course, welcome to do so. And in 3 months, we check out if it works, or if Richie feels this is too much work and nobody's helping him, or whatever, right? If something doesn't work, we can revisit this point.
We just volunteer all the new joiners on the team.
It's the new requirement to join team. You have to maintain. until you find another new member of the team, you have to maintain that badge.
So you don't want new people? Is that what it is? Yeah.
No, we want more people. We
Did you
had
just volunteer in?
3 or 4 people join recently, so by all means, like if there's a plan and a desire, maybe we can find some things for you to do. Okay, so consensus is basically keep as is and look at it in March. And I'll try to find how I can subscribe to the thing.
You probably have a RSS feed.
Okay. That works. So use an RSS reader. Consensus. We will keep it as is and reassess the situation in roughly 3 months. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Nice. Good. I'm suffering a severe case of too many tabs. Just a moment. Okay, Mark is done. There's nothing pressing. Björn, I see you're marking the scrape time tolerance, the timestamp tolerance. Do you want to talk about this?
I'm not aware that I'm marking anything.
Okay, I thought it was you.
Perhaps my cursor is there, but I haven't. That was just by coincidence.
Okay.
I want to talk about my own proposals. But yeah, I guess we can just, I hope we'll get through the whole backlog.
Sorry, you hope what?
I hope we'll just get through the whole backlog anyway.
Probably. Bartek, at some point we need Prem and Augustine to join for a shared Prometheus UI repository between Thanos and Prometheus, potentially. Because we've been blocking on this for a bit.
Okay, yeah. I will do it for the next one.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then let's do Björn. If we can get rid of the notice file.
I have not gotten any traction at SoundCloud from about letting go of the SoundCloud notice. I think people just want to keep it, but are not afraid or don't want to say so or something like that. I tried a few times over the years and it's just not happening. So I think we can't get rid of the notice files completely.
Is your gut feeling that they just don't want to give, because they're lawyers, they never want to give a definitive statement unless they have to? Or do you think they really want to have it stick?
I think it's more the former and that the lawyers, that nobody has time to actually think about what it means to let go of this thing. But yeah, I've never gotten anyone to. I've done what I can, but I don't think it will happen.
I mean, the situation is surprisingly unclear about Apache license and what the notice file actually means. My understanding from what the lawyers told us is you don't actually need a notice file. You could just leave it out because it's everywhere in the code. But what I understood is if we have the notice file and then the notice file is misleading, there's a problem, right? That's why I thought it would be much better if you can get rid of it and be done with it, because now we have it everywhere and we in the notice file, we have hopelessly outdated information. So, for example, in the notice file, we have whatever code XYZ is contained in this project, but then we have added more code later and we haven't updated the notice file. So now that other code owner might feel their notice file was updated last week. Okay, but like every repository has a notice file, right? Because originally we put it all there very like diligent. On the other hand, since we don't do vendoring anymore, I'm not even sure if that still legally means we are including the code. If we are not including it, just depend on it, but it's only downloaded if someone builds it. But then we have, now do we have artifacts? No, we don't have artifacts in the code base, right? So this is all where I throw my hands up and I have no clue what that legally means. Just my gut feeling is if you have a hopelessly outdated notice file, that's bad in any case.
I mean, I think we don't need to, like, maybe I think something we did in the beginning was include notices from other things that we vendored into the main notice file.
Yeah, even that, yeah.
Pretty sure we don't need to do that if we're just using that stuff as a library. Right? That will not let us get rid of all the notices in the notice file because some of them are about the actual source code in that project, like the SoundCloud limited notice.
I have the feeling we are mixing two things. One, where we considered like this initial thing from SoundCloud, and if that must be retained under Apache 2. And second, if we are required to retain a complete running tab of on stuff.
I think we are not required to do that, but if we have an incomplete list in the notice file, that's kind of a weird intermediate state. Like we can't argue we have no notice file because we have one. And in the end, we have a notice file that is not up to date. Perhaps we can just remove everything except the SoundCloud file. I don't know what all that means, right? It could also be this is all we are overthinking this, and there no risk is we can just keep it the way it is and don't worry. I don't know.
Richie, go ahead.
One thing I can offer is I can try and talk to Merle about it. She's on the board of the Apache Foundation, so hopefully she knows someone who has a strong informed opinion on what we should be doing, and hopefully also some lawyer who is familiar with this question. Of course, none of us are lawyers. The other thing, I don't know if this is immediately helpful here, but something which I'm considering with my Grafana hat on is run scanners on code bases with which just like do full bill of material. Of course, it's all the rage these days with supply chain attacks and blah, blah, blah. And then add the results of those scanners as human readable notices in the specific files that you say, okay, this file contains code from XYZ at commit whatever, or maybe up to time whatever, or maybe without any time, and you just refer back to that repository with this and that file. So you have something where you can actually do this due diligence on a file-based level, and ideally also with tooling which re-aggregates all this information. But that's not like finished or anything, but that's something which might happen and we can just steal and apply here. But for immediate stuff, I can try and ask Merle if she has any knowledge on this or can point us to to someone who has a strong informed opinion.
So I think something that would help reduce the workload and the potential confusion is if we can remove all the notices from things that we used to vendor. Right? We're no longer vendoring them. That means we're no longer redistributing those sources. So we probably are no longer required to redistribute those notices.
We don't gain much from this, do we? Because Björn's concern is more that we forget someone and they have standing to I don't know what. I doubt anyone would actively complain and lawyer up just because they are thanked too much. that doesn't sound like a realistic legal risk. The legal risk is someone is actually strongly complaining about this. I mean, on the positive side, we are not singular people here. We have Linux Foundation and CNCF at our backs. So if anyone is strongly disagreeing, we would be referring them to Linux Foundation's lawyers anyway. And then Michael sends them a nice email, which tells them why they're wrong, or tells us what to do. Like in the past, when we had similar situations where we needed legal advice for Prometheus, Linux Foundation was more than able to provide all this, and also basically just give while we figure out stuff. Of course, Linux Foundation is loud, so the likelihood of someone going directly after Linux Foundation is not exactly huge. And they wouldn't be going after us. They wouldn't be going after CNCF. If anyone does anything, of course, we did a notice wrong, they would need to go directly towards Linux Foundation. Of course, that's the actual legal entity which holds the trademarks and everything. And it's not called Umbrella for nothing.
All right, so to summarize, Richie, you will reach out to lawyer people who understand the Apache license, who can tell us what we can and cannot do there. But you're not concerned too much with this being incomplete.
No, like, so yes, I'll contact Apache board about this, or someone on the Apache board, and hopefully they'll relay this further or whatever. And B, I'm not really concerned about this. I think we need at some point to have some automation anyway. And ideally, I would prefer to migrate towards file level information and not just blanket notices in some file no one really looks at anyway. Because it's quite useless. Because honestly, I would much prefer to know that this one particular file contains something from X than being sent on a needle and haystack thing. Something in this whole repository at any point in time might have contained something from X. Thank you for that information.
Yeah, but this is what my whole line of argument, I don't know if that is legally sound, is that we create the impression that the notice file contains all the references to code we have included. If we added, perhaps it would be, but this is what Merle might tell us, right? Perhaps it's a nice thing to put into the notice file like that in the directories where we included something, there are the notices of included code, so that we make clear we don't want to claim that no other code is included in this repository. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I would be great to know for sure how this has to be handled.
And I mean, my main point is that with the removal of vendoring, we have changed what is included, and we have not updated the notice file to remove the things that are no longer included in this repository.
Which would, at least, if then the notice file only contains the line, this repository code, it contains code that has to be allowed at SoundCloud. I think that's probably, nobody can claim this is misunderstanding. Like, this would mislead to, this means this is a complete list of contributors, whatever. But yeah, this situation where we have like 5 or 10 things listed and then an 11th thing is not listed, that might be weird. If there is no sentence like more code is included and the license is included in the respective directory.
I mean, if that's your concern, we can just prefix that notice file with a, hey, we believe this is a hopefully complete list. If you find anything missing, please contact us.
I don't even think we should maintain a complete list, right? I would, if that's okay with the Apache, I understood it's okay to just not have a notice file and put all the notices in the directories and done. But we cannot get rid of the notice file because that would mean we delete the SoundCloud line now and we have no clue if somebody will be angry about this. So if
But-
we could keep that part, but then the notice, if there's a legally sound way of just keeping the first 10 lines of the notice file as is, and then have a line that Apache license compatible tells people look into the directories for notice of included codes, blah, 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 however this has to be worded, I think that would be a pretty sweet spot.
I think that doesn't even need to be in the notice file. The notice file is literally about it's just about extra credit.
I'm not so sure. I mean, if that's the case, even better, right? Then we can just remove all those individual notices from the notice file, except the copyright Prometheus team and SoundCloud.
Like if someone wants to know which Go packages with which white licenses we've used, they can look at the Go mod and figure it out.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but sometimes we have actually code included, right? So this was the recent update of the notice file. And Julius actually meticulously put this also into the notice file that we include code from the Go code base, right?
But if
so
that's
Merle,
your
we
concern,
have to know, we have to wait what Merle tells us. If it's as easy as we just don't need anything in the notice file anyway, cool, then let's just do it.
but if that's the core of your concern, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and most of the contracts which I did were in under German law, not under US law. That being said, I know tons of contracts in the US which have ample provisions of basically stating we also have stuff which is legally binding in these appendixes. So we can also rephrase that question as a, can we remove everything except for maybe the SoundCloud notice? And then literally just have a line that all the notice files which are in the repository are considered part of the overall notices for this repository, and done.
Yeah. For example, don't ask me what we have to do. I'm just concerned that it feels what we have done right now is not right.
The technical question is, are we confident that we have all the required notice files in all the subdirectories? Are we certain that we didn't? Okay, we are not.
I mean, this is way easier now that we don't vendor anymore, right? The vendoring tools were trying to put the notice files into the vendor directories, but since we're not vendoring, this is all the way. And if we only have code that we explicitly include, plus the whole React thing, right?
Yeah,
the React thing already has some attempts to put all copyrights and licenses in there, right? Julius should know what there is.
It is the old JavaScript thing, yeah.
It tries to. I mean, it goes to the node modules directory and finds all the license and notice files that do exist in there and zips them all together and trying to do the best.
The issue is more that we have Bootstrap and Moment.js, I think, directly in the code base for the classic UI. That's still foreign code that we kind of vendor in the repository itself.
Yeah.
But it's not like this fluent thing that we add a ton of dependencies in every release and everything. So we have a few fairly well-defined things. I think this is manageable, and I think we have a good chance that we can actually at least prove that we made the best effort to put all the notice file in there, that nobody can assume we were maliciously excluding anything here or didn't do our due diligence. The only trigger for me is right now that the notice file we have right now is just wrong, right? And nobody cares. And if that's okay, then that's okay. But this is where my concern is coming from. I want us to be in a state where we can at least believably claim we thought we did the right thing. But we cannot claim we thought it was the right thing to just let the file rot.
Okay. I mean, in this case, we can also ask CNCF, of course, if we do have a risk, if we have imperfect notice files. I am pretty certain I know what reply we would be getting, which is make reasonable effort, and if someone really complains, we'll deal with it. But we can also just ask Chris for his opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds reasonable to me to just remove everything from the notice file except the first 5 lines or whatever there is. But it would be cool, and it's very low effort to ask Merle if that's okay, right? If she says this is clearly not okay, at least we know. If she says don't know, then we could try. And if she says sure, this is fine, this is how Apache projects do it, then even better.
I guess that CNCF also knows in which term they did receive Prometheus from SoundCloud, and if they really get the full copyright, like they do now. I don't know if it was the case in 2015 or 16, but if that's the case, then it can probably also get rid of the SoundCloud in the notice file. But yeah, we should ask CNCF.
That's actually a good point. I can try and look through the archives of the CNCF governing board as of a few hours ago. At least for other things, I saw bits and pieces where precisely those kinds of questions were, like, I didn't read the emails, I just scrolled through subjects. I can also try and look that up.
There is no copyright claim from SoundCloud. This is, I know that quite explicitly. Of course, we went through this. And you can notice in the notice file, no pun intended, there is no copyright by SoundCloud. There's only the sentence code in this repository has been developed at SoundCloud. And the copyright line is explicitly Prometheus team. And that was a deliberate decision back then, because taking the copyright is also liability. And there was no appetite at SoundCloud to claim any copyright on this. This is really,
so the way I see it is Prometheus, the copyright of Prometheus was never owned by SoundCloud, and in exchange for this these 2 lines in the notice, all the work that Björn and Julius did and Matt did at the time has gone into the Prometheus copyright.
Yeah, I mean, this was all written in Germany, and in Germany, the copyright is the copyright of the person who wrote it. It cannot be transferred. The only thing, it can be licensed, but the license is Apache, so it's licensed to the world anyway. This is completely irrelevant from that perspective, who owns the copyright. From a US perspective, you could transfer the copyright, but the effect is the same because it's still licensed via Apache license. So in a US perspective, you could now fight about who actually owns the copyright, but it's practically irrelevant.
It's even worse. You can assign copyright under German law. You cannot assign authorship under German law, and that's something which does not even exist as a legal construct in the US.
Yeah. But the world only works because the effect is the same if you license the copyright or if you transfer the copyright, and the license is Apache too, so there's nothing to fight about. It's also like this is a more European versus US thing, the copyright thing. European view is copyright as a personal right, and US law it's a property right or something, blah, blah, blah. But this is totally, I think this is not so much a question about who owns the copyright. I don't think we have to do research in that. Okay, but I think we're all, none of us is a lawyer, so we're discussing things that we don't know. I think inquiring from Merle, like in general, what's the nature of that notice file, and if there's an easy way out, that's probably the best thing. And then we can always ask CNCF lawyers if we need like proper
I modified it slightly. Let's try for consensus on this one. Consensus: Richie H to reach out to Merle Kranz and Chris A if we can simply delete the file, reduce it to just SoundCloud, or keep doing reasonable effort to keep it somewhat correct.
Reduce to SoundCloud. I mean, I would still keep the copyright Prometheus team line, right?
And I would also like to get them to define what is correct.
Yeah, that's let's let me rewrite.
You could say, like, you could write ask Merle and Chris what's a reasonable way to reduce the notice file to exclude listings of individual notices?
I'll move the second sentence into the discussion. So the new consensus would be consensus Richie H to read out to Merle Kranz, Apache board, and Chris A to find out what the correct course of action is. And I'll just move the other options into discussion above so we don't bind ourselves any weird ways. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Nice. We are at 5 past the hour. I don't need a break, but I'm told other humans need a break. So I suggest 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't care. Which do we want?
5.
5? Okay. So we'll see each other in 5 minutes. So, the European Space Agency just tweeted this. That's the life-threatening alarm on the ISS for
That does not
fire,
sound very
loss of
threatening.
pressure, and such, which is super interesting.
Did they hit some satellite debris again, or?
No. DLR, the German Space Agency, or the German Space Control, as in control satellite trajectories and such. They have a advent calendar of scientific sounds, like they had 3D printers and various other bits and pieces. And today in their calendar, they have the ISS alarm sound. It's also quite nice to get people back on to the screen.
Oh, I'm sad I missed it.
I can play it again. And also, funnily enough, they host it on SoundCloud.
You will watch the replay.
Yeah, that's it. And I put it into chat. It's probably not enough for the meeting notes. Okay. Do we still have a Bartek? No, we are Bartek-less. Okay. Then we can't do this. We can't do this. We can't do this. Yeah, Björn, we actually made it to your topic. There we go.
Yeah. Perfect example. This is not behind the feature flag, right? But it's experimental. There was a lengthy discussion. Context here is we introduced a while ago a Boolean flag to adjust the timestamp to the regular scheduled scrape interval if you are only very few milliseconds off, 2 or 4 or something. And that was triggered by the Go runtime suddenly creating more jitter with their timers. Apparently that is still the case. It's not considered a bug, but I might be wrong here. This was my impression from very superficial research. The cool thing about this, so we noticed because all of a sudden the TSDB took way more space because we had more jitter on the timestamp, which by now we know is also because even the slightest deviation already creates a 16-bit timestamp piece of data and not just whatever 3 or 4 what it could be. So whenever you are not at exactly a double delta of 0, you need a lot of space. So this was a hugely effective measurement to save space. We could also, of course, improve our compression algorithm. So I thought this is a good idea, and we should just make this a fully fledged feature. Back then, it was like, no, this is only temporary for the time being. There was a huge discussion. Later, the flag timestamp tolerance was introduced, still marked as experimental. So you can actually configure how much you want this, because some people also wanted more. And now I think you could just use the timestamp tolerance timestamp and set it to 0 if you don't want this behavior. So we could get rid of the other flag. And I think this is a useful feature. We should just promote it to a real production feature and only use the one flag. That's my suggestion. What do you think?
I think it's a good idea in general. In particular, about the jitter that the Go runtime introduces, would it make sense to have our own timers that are precise, or is that just obsolete with this?
I think that that a heavily loaded server will still, even if you have more precise timers, a heavily loaded server will create jitter. And in general, in the general Prometheus use case, I think what we have as the ±4 millisecond or whatever, this is in most 99+% of use cases, that's nobody cares, right? So I think the count behavior is really good. And it also helps even if you go runtime or your timer is more precise, but you have a bit of a loaded server. And in that case, you are doubly interested in not using more space, more RAM, and more disk. So I think it's just a good thing in general, even if you have jitter for other reasons. And if you rely on very precise sampling, which is only millisecond, which is not super precise anyway, but yeah, maybe later in the future we will have more precise measurements, who knows, then you can just configure this to a different behavior. Like the default behavior should be this 4 milliseconds or whatever we have right now. And what I think Julian said, if there is a use case where you want ±500 milliseconds because you are not interested in anything more precise, then you can also configure it. Great. And most users will just never look at this flag and be happy. But that's the case we have right now. I mean, the argument back then was this flag will disappear, but now it's a year later and the flag hasn't disappeared. And we even got a new flag because this was useful.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense to promote that to stable, but what I actually miss in Prometheus now about that is to know exactly what is the actual jitter. So what is the actual issue in the Go runtime that we are facing? Because I needed to increase it to 10 milliseconds in production, and that gave me like a lot of space back. So I don't know if this should be like a tool in the TSDB analysis to see how effective is the double data compression of the timestamp, or if this should be a metric exposed by Prometheus, maybe a summary to see, okay, like 98% of the time we have like 3 milliseconds jitter thanks to the underlying runtime. So I don't know if we should add metrics or analysis first to know exactly what would be the best default option, or if we just promote that as stable and say, okay, if we need to change that value, we will still change it because it's just useful.
And I think promoting it to stable does not mean we can't change the default, right?
Okay.
The one concern which we might have, or which I actually have, just as a completely random example, assume that anyone would be mad enough to run more than a single Prometheus instance. Just pure speculation. And if they have different values, do we introduce any weird artifacts if we cut off at different points? Other argument, if we have different jitter between different platforms or what have you, different versions, that might also be something which is bad. So I strongly believe that whatever we end up doing, we should have information about this anyway. So anyone who has more than a single Prometheus instance can make an informed decision fleet-wide what they actually want to do.
I mean, I would also love to have data on
sorry,
like what.
and if you switch back and forth with the default, it's still good to emit that data and to make the users aware, but you're still in the situation where you're introducing a wild mix of different default values. So I think it's better to wait a few months and actually come up with a default value. But if waiting a few months doesn't help us, just set one now.
I mean,
first of all, there is a default value now, and this feature is enabled already by default.
I mean, don't jump around without a hard need.
Yeah, I think changing the default value could be seen as a breaking change.
I mean, can we communicate that this flag, this feature is not going away? We're keeping it. We may still adjust the default value if we have better data on it.
Yes,
and then
we can communicate that.
Or as I understand what's happening here, if you have multiple Prometheus servers, they will be out of sync anyway, won't they?
Yes.
And then as long as this jitter value is much, much smaller than the scrape interval, I don't think you would ever see any bad, or like, I don't think you can even get them to like align.
So there is a safeguard that we only accept the tolerance less than 1% of the scrape interval.
Mm. And I mean, strictly speaking, the behavior that we introduced as the mitigation was a breaking change. But we said this is just a mitigation, and it is declared as experimental, will probably go away later anyway. But I don't think that this formal definite, like nobody noticed, right? People only noticed that their storage space was exploding, which is on the other, we should not forget to fix that at some point, that we don't have this huge jump in per timestamp storage space if you have even the slightest jitter. But that's, yeah, it's an independent thing. So let's
So
think about if we should adjust the default value right now, or if we are happy, and then promote scrape timestamp tolerance to stable and get rid of scrape adjust timestamps.
how can we get more information about what a good value would be?
We could introduce a summary and then ask the user that complain what is the values of those summaries.
That would also help us to find the perfect bit bucketing for the next storage version or subversion or whatever.
Somewhat related, Ben and I talked about this ages ago of basically a show tech support like functionality. For those not aware, show tech support is on Cisco and Arista. It's slightly different on other networking hardware, but it doesn't matter. It's a singular command which collects everything which tech support needs to debug whatever is happening. And if we had something like this, and we could ask users to just donate this data to us, either on an ongoing ping back home basis or on a copy and paste this page and send it in this web form or by email or what have you.
We have something already which is like prom tool debug all, which will take the pprof and the matrix and that kind of things. We can extend that.
Yeah, I think my gut is it's probably better if this is accessible through the web interface, even if it's just calling prom tool in the background. Just of course it's easier for someone who does not have direct shell access to that system. Like
For example, because they're running in Kubernetes.
For example. Like I wouldn't depend on shell access because I don't think that's the common case for the people who would be able and willing to donate.
And we should also
prom tool is only doing API queries, so it should be doable.
That's the point. And we just have a /tech support in Prometheus, and you can copy and paste that and give it to us, and we are happy and done.
We also need to be confidently able to say there is nothing private in this. Which with debug all, I wouldn't be like, I mean, I don't know what's in there, right?
That's the issue that in most of the cases, we need the Prometheus configuration, and in most of the cases, people have bad things there. And even if we have some field marks as secret, people put secrets in other places. So this will never be safe.
We wouldn't need the full configuration for a show tech support. We would need the feature flags. We would need certain data about their running system, but we would not need full configuration.
Well, many cases are solved just by looking at the user's configuration. So this is something needed.
Yes, but we are not talking about solving a specific problem which the user is hitting. We are talking about, please give us data about how you use Prometheus and what the real world metrics of your Prometheus are, so we can make a better informed decision about what we should be doing upstream or what defaults we should have.
But then I think we shouldn't call it tech support. I mean, what we're talking about is what we talked about earlier about sending, like collecting telemetry of what's actually happening in real world Prometheus servers somehow.
Yes, I'm not saying we need a show text report. I'm saying this is a concept which exists and which is hugely beneficial.
I mean, also, like if Prometheus collects this data, like going back to the concrete jitter, right? I mean, we have a lot of Prometheus servers that I can look at, and like to answer those concrete questions. But are we even measuring that at the moment? Could we measure that?
No, we are not. So when I did find this out, I just looked at the raw samples in TSDB.
But they are already subject to the de-jitter, right? So they wouldn't give us any information about what's inside that interval. Right? I couldn't now go to my Prometheus servers and see what the real distribution is.
Oh, you could, because you probably have jitters higher than 2 milliseconds. You could still see it.
Yeah, I mean, you would only see the jitter that wasn't de-jittered. Yeah. So I mean, you don't need to introduce a metric for that. You could, from the data, it's in the data, right? You can see by just looking at the metrics data, you can see looking at it intensely, you will see what the intended scrape interval was, and then you can calculate the deviations.
How hard would it be to encode this looking at in PromTool?
Could be easy, I guess.
Playing with the timestamps? Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, one thing we could explicitly say also, like in a wider forum, is we want to keep this flag. We want to validate that the default is reasonable, or like find the right default. We are asking people for their real world data. Here's how you collect it. Right, but that, like, we can't realistically ask people to do spreadsheet analysis over raw timestamps from TSDB.
I also don't think, I mean, I think this is such a non-issue for 99.9% of users that people won't even understand what we're asking them for. I think we need, if we want to do like fancy stuff to find the right default value, we just have to do it ourselves.
Actually, I've come up with a query if you know your scrape interval that you can try out, which is in the chat. We see timestamp up minus timestamp up offset, and then your scrape interval.
Linus is crunching numbers.
Okay, but we don't need to do this live. So, I mean, we can try and hammer this query out onto Twitter and the mailing lists and such, and just see who replies with data. As to the issue at hand, consensus is acknowledge its default, and we'll try to look for an actual value. I see nodding. Okay, let me try and formulate this. Consensus.
I think in the query, even the matching it to your scrape interval doesn't really matter, right? You're just comparing a few scrapes apart as a moving window. It's fine. So it's fine if we just put in like 1 minute or whatever.
Has to be multiple of the scrape interval.
So how about this? Consensus. We will mark this feature as stable. Before we do so, we will try to find a reasonable default value and reach out to users about donating real-world data.
Okay, how about reflecting that we want to get rid of scrape adjust timestamps, like the Boolean flag? Is that consensus? That was part of my proposal.
Yeah, I mean, if it's stable, I mean, if the feature is stable, by definition, we don't need. Yeah, okay, I get what you mean.
The history is that we first had just the Boolean flag because we had a vicious Brazilian discussion where the outcome was we definitely don't want to have a flag where you configure the tolerance. And now we have it after all. So now that we have the numerical flag, we don't need the Boolean flags anymore because you can just set the numerical flag to 0 instead of having the extra.
That is correct. Yes.
So we don't need the Boolean flag, and we probably should. It is experimental. We can just remove it, but it's probably nicer to just say we will remove it. One more. It is now a no-op, but in the next minor release, the flag is gone, and if you still use the flag, it's an error.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I have a more complicated sentence, but it hopefully covers what you mean. Consensus. We will mark this feature as stable and only have a numerical flag. Non-zero implies Boolean set. No, we don't really need this. That's overlowering.
Have the numerical
Only
flag.
retain.
Or just make it explicit. We will promote scrape timestamp tolerance to stable and remove scrape, deprecate/remove scrape adjust timestamps.
Okay,
Then
fair.
there's
Yeah,
no
fair.
misunderstanding possible.
Consensus. We will promote scrape timestamp tolerance to stable and remove scrape adjust timestamps. There's one period. Okay, I just fixed the typo. Before we do so, we will try to find a reasonable default value and reach out to users about donating real-world data. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Very good. I think I need to open the door. I'll be back in a second. We can talk about binary signing because we don't really have much else. I'll copy it over in a second.
We have broken our promise.
Maybe we can use age.
This flag will be removed in a future release. This flag is now stable. I mean, the first flag, the original flag, is then removed. So we kept half of the promise.
That's close enough.
So Matthias, people use multiple script intervals in one Prometheus server. Now they also have the ability to just relabel the script interval and time also.
Wait, what was that?
Relabeling event. So now you can have even like script interval for each target independent from the others.
Mm-hmm.
We can also open the floor or cut early. For binary signing, I dislike PGP and it's a continuing dumpster fire. Age is able to sign binaries through SSH keys. Maybe that's a better approach, or we wait for some time before, basically for others to figure out a way forward. There's also this Google thing.
Yeah, we actually are working on that with Ben, and the Go releaser is able to sign with Sixter. So I think that's the current proposal, that we use Sixter, which is the new CNCF or the new Linux Foundation thing. I don't know what is Ben's progress. I know he has been working on that in the last weeks, but I cannot speak for him about the actual progress of that.
Totally fine, but then I'm removing the thing that's from the backlog from easily a year ago, probably longer.
Okay. I think that if the floor is open, I think we should discuss about when we will do the next summit and what duration should it be. If we reach the bottom of the backlog, we can either switch to 1 hour writing or do it every 2 months.
My gut would be to move to a 2-month cadence, given that we are through with basically much of the backlog, but with the explicit understanding that we don't like that we make it really lightweight to just reintroduce a monthly cadence. We can also consider to run the next one in January and then see how it goes and make a decision for 2022. Because I think it's a relatively large gap if we like it's 1.5 months from now, because we shifted this one earlier. And then in January we can basically plan for the rest. The other thing which I've already been thinking about but haven't come to a conclusion on, we will most likely / hopefully / whatever, let's see, have the possibility to meet each other in Valencia in May, which will also mess up the cadence to some extent. I would like to have an in-person Dev Summit offsite, what have you, if at all possible. But I still think that the online format has value. How the two interplay, I am not certain. That's something we just need to think about and figure out as we move forward. Maybe important FYI, we will have a Prometheus Day before KubeCon in Valencia, and currently we don't have any specific plans for a PromCon North America in spring. Of course, CNCF strongly recommends against it, just because of all the COVID risk and juggling that risk basically. For fall, where KubeCon is in the US, and so we would have the PromCon in Europe. I have something for Munich with enough space and everything. So yeah, I fully agree. We probably need less often Dev Summits. I would say we just take the next one in January and maybe send email around what others think, because we don't have everyone on team here. It's probably too early to figure out what happens in May or not in January. We will almost likely be looking at graphs which look like this. In March, we should have more visibility on what happens in May. But we can write this down as a thing. Fourth monthly is not a thing, is it? As fourth nightly? It's not a full consensus, but just for the record, we will consider moving to a 2-month cadence with the Dev Summits. It is unclear how KubeCon in Valencia will play out. We will have the Dev Summit in January. We will have the virtual Dev Summit in January. I'm not marking this as green or anything. It's just or let's mark it as mauve. It's an info point. Anything else for open floor?
I mean, for a in-person Dev Summit, I think it would be interesting to find ways of people participate, like do it hybrid, use the buzzword. If people, I think did we have this a bit that people would, I vaguely remember we had this where people would ask something on the chat or something. We could live stream stuff, and then we could have a text chat where people can ask questions.
Historically, the in-person dev summits didn't have a streaming component or anything. Like going way back historically, we even deliberately didn't make a super raw thing public beyond like.
Yeah, so that's actually a good thing to talk about. If I guess there was a bit of we are here in person in a room and there is no record, like no record as in like a recording. We have notes, but the notes are controlled. So that might be an environment we actually want to have. So we would not like to stream it. But on the other hand, live streaming is also very cool. Or we could have both. I don't know.
So, I mean, first, and this is important to Jan, always with the dev summits, the in-person ones, we invited others. Like this was not limited. So it was not limited to only Prometheus team or anything. It was just like in the room. In part, of course, we didn't have any other means of synchronizing within team, and like if there is a legal request or something, that's not something which you want to publish to the world. But now that we have other mechanisms to talk about stuff which like is actually internal or secret, like a legal request or something, we don't need to overload dev summits with this type of thing. I'm not convinced streaming would work superbly well, just based on experience. On the other hand, we can just try and take one of those Jabra devices which are non-horrible, and people can join remotely, and we figure it out. Again, I think it's too early to actually make a call on this. If we are just meeting on the Saturday after KubeCon and we can all travel, it's just a case of the people who really want to just notifying us, and they stay a day longer, and we just tell them where to go and done.
Now I actually remember where my vague memory is coming from. I was reading the Dev Summit. I was not at the Dev Summit, but I was reading the meeting notes, how they were typed. And then I started to chat with people about what's showing up in the meeting notes. That was kind of a very indirect way of live streaming. So yeah, I mean, it depends who is. I mean, if we have people who like specifically want to be there, that would be the one aspect to consider. And then the other thing, if we actually want just for the publicity, want like have a public live stream for like as a community event. I don't know. Perhaps we can discuss this at the next Dev Summit when we perhaps also have a bit of more idea how the year will play out.
I honestly think that we cannot properly discuss this before March, but I would love to be wrong. And we can just like, if the world feels stable enough that we discuss it in January, we just do so.
Or the world has already ended in January. Then it's also something to know.
I think most of or anyone on this call is probably able to grasp graphs and time series. So all of us will be double or triple vaccinated. I don't think any of us will die. But lots of other people probably will. That's not a good way to end this call.
Okay, but I mean, let's just think about how we would like to see the future of the Dev Summit, including these various forms, and then we can discuss it next time. We probably also have more people than in the call. Now we have a bunch of people already dropped.
No.
So like make it a proper topic of the Dev Summit, how the Dev Summit should play out in the future.
I put it on the backlog. I'll also put the cadence on the backlog.
I mean, the in-person Dev Summit could also have stuff like a lot of more involved topic in this Dev Summit are, okay, let's write a design doc. And then if you have like a day-long in-person Dev Summit, we could perhaps even have things like work groups that during that day work out like proper, complicated, involved designs and ideas. That could also be something that we will never have in a 2-hour virtual Dev Summit like this one.
If we're going that far, we also we have 2 days in front of KubeCon. And we won't have a full PromCon, we will have a Prometheus Day, which reduces the amount of work quite a bit, which is super nice. But that also means that except for maybe Julian and myself, people won't be super busy. So we can try and just get a meeting room through CNCF in the actual work days before KubeCon, not after, and just get a meeting room or two and try and do that kind of thing, or maybe even just use 1 or 2 hotel rooms if we can't get anything through CNCF. But at least in the past, when it was still in BCC and such in Berlin, they always found a way to give us some room to have discussions.
Yep.
And that would allow us to have breakouts and hackathons and what have you.
Sounds very good, yeah.
I'll also write this down. I like this idea. So maybe we can actually have like a Prometheus Hack Day or something. And Darshan, thank you for the hackathon suggestion. And doing this on a workday is also nice. And we will either have the Monday or the Tuesday left over, Prometheus-wise.
At least Polar Signal's already planning on coming the week before for like a company offsite. So it would kind of fall in place with all of that then. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yep. So you can already tell us where the good tapas is.
Let's hope. I can tell you where the bad tapas is.
I don't care where the bad tapas is. It sounds weird talking about in-person stuff, but it also sounds good talking about in-person stuff. So 12 minutes left, I guess. Everyone gets 12 minutes back.
All the other agenda items are like depending on people who are not there right now.
Correct. We don't have Prem and Augustine to talk about Prometheus/Thanos UI merging. For Google Forms as vulnerability handling, I'm still waiting for CNCF 6 security or tag security in the meantime to come up with a CNCF-wide proposal for how to deal with vulnerabilities. But also, as we are overhauling this within Grafana, maybe I have some ideas coming from that end. But we don't have Frederick, we don't have Bartek, so not much use discussing it. Caching model, Frederick and Bartek are missing.
And this also sounds like this was added before we had the storage working group, and now it's probably a storage working group item.
Yeah, you're right. I can also just mothball that one.
Mothball it to the storage working group.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send email or I'll just copy and move it over to their backlog. And the last one would be Bartek with a tracing client goaling with same paradigms as the metrics one, but that is also quite old, like literally 2 years old.
Yeah, and by now, Bartek is the maintainer of client Golang, so he
Yeah.
probably would have started with that already if he had time.
Pretty much. And that's the backlog we managed to go through. Also, Darshan and Jan, at all times, feel free to suggest stuff to put onto the backlog.
Amazing, we have reached the end of the backlog.
Who would have
And
thought 1.5
honestly.
years ago? We started
Yeah,
this 1.5 years ago to somehow get through the backlog, and it only ever got worse.
But yeah, by January we might have more stuff on the backlog, right? So yeah, but we already
Usually
said
over
we
New
will have
Year's, not much happens.
we'll have it in January.
I've been tracking this as kind of a hobby over New Year's. Not much is coming, but we'll see. Worst thing, we start on month 1, which is just nice numerically speaking, and then we figure out what to do with the rest of the year and just adapt as necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, then everyone gets a few minutes back. Julian, as you hit record, you need to upload this to YouTube. I can also help if there's any issues. Just poke me.
I think the previous one wasn't uploaded.
Yeah, I forgot, but I uploaded it right before this started, and it's also already linked in the meeting notes.
Great.
And I checked while we had the Dev Summit. It's uploaded completely, and you can view it. But while preparing the header for this meeting, I realized that I didn't have the YouTube link for the previous one. And then I saw I didn't even have a YouTube video. And then I did all the things, and now we have one.
Okay, I will stop the recording then.
Okay. Then have a nice Christmas or holidays or whichever, New Year's, blah, blah, blah.
So it's the celebration.
Stay